Hello world, I'm Lilia Tam, Program Director for the Open Debate Coalition. Welcome to the first ever open debate for U.S. Senate. So we're here in Orlando, and during the last several days, more than 900 questions were submitted by regular people across Florida and across the nation. Over 400,000 votes were cast online. And tonight, all the questions for Republican Congressman David Jolly and Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson are going to come from the 30 questions that received the most votes from people like you. Tonight, we have two cutting-edge moderators. We've got Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks, which has over 3 billion views on YouTube. And we also have Benny Johnson from the Independent Journal Review, which averages about 35 million unique viewers every month. We'll also have Maria Padilla on hand to deliver one of the voters' questions. She's the founder of the blog orlandolatino.org. And we'll even have a cameo from a Hollywood celebrity. So tonight, we have two fiery debaters who are each leading in numerous polls in their respective primaries because of their political smarts. This will be an unprecedented matchup, something people will be talking about tomorrow that you don't want to miss. And so that's coming up. But first, let me give you some background on the Open Debate Coalition, which is hosting this event tonight. So the coalition is comprised of top progressive and conservative political leaders and top tech leaders from Silicon Valley. This includes our co-hosts tonight, the Progressive Change Institute, which is led by Stephanie Taylor and Adam Green. And we also have Americans for Tax Reform, led by Grover Norquist. So the coalition includes former strategists for George W. Bush, the Republican National Committee, Senate Republicans, and Mitt Romney. But it also includes NARAL, MoveOn.org, Democracy for America, labor unions, women's organizations, civil rights advocates, and even the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. We've got media voices like Ariana Huffington, plus Silicon Valley leaders who support this crowdsourced nature of open debates, including Wikipedia co-founder Jimmy Wales. We have Cindy Cohn from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and we also have Craig from Craigslist. So needless to say, the members of the Open Debate Coalition don't necessarily agree on every issue, but we do agree on one core principle, that political debates must better represent the will of the people. And what that means is asking candidates top questions voted on by the people instead of silly gotcha questions. And it also means liberating debate footage so that you don't need cable news or TV at all, but instead you can watch it on an open feed that's available to any website, TV station, blog, social media platform, or individual that wants to broadcast it. We at the Coalition hope that tonight's debate serves as a model for presidential events later this year, and that it soon becomes the norm for political debates all across America for every office up and down the ballot. Tonight, we invite you to spread the word on social media during the debate, letting folks know that they can always watch this at FloridaOpenDebate.com and tweeting it at #OpenDebate. So with that, let's begin the first ever open debate for U.S. Senate. I'm proud now to announce our moderators, Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks and Benny Johnson from the Independent Journal Review.
Thank you, Lilia. We appreciate it. Now, boy, do we have an absolutely unique debate for you guys tonight, because you actually asked the questions. So our job as moderators will be to ask follow-up questions to make sure you get the answers to the questions that you asked. And boy, there were a lot of questions out there. 900 questions submitted, 400,000 votes, which is amazing. So I want to thank our hosts here, Open Debate Coalition, co-hosts, Progressive Change Institute, and Americans for Tax Reform. And this event is going to last about 75 minutes. There will not be any questions about boxers or briefs or iPhones or Blackberries or any of that. Why? Because you didn't ask them. No one proposed those questions. Nobody voted on those questions. Instead, what you've got is a lot of substance, which you're going to see throughout the debate here. So I want to make sure everybody understands that we're going to have 1 minute for the initial answers for the candidates and then 45 seconds for follow-ups. Anything beyond that is moderator's discretion. So with that, Benny, take it away.
All right. For me, by the way, it's briefs. So I have the distinguished honor of introducing the real stars of the show, the two congressmen who are joining us tonight. The first congressman that I am introducing is Congressman David Jolly. He is a native Floridian. He is a lawyer by trade and practice. And he tells me that he has, at one time, been to every Major League Baseball stadium in America. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman. The second congressman that I am introducing tonight is Congressman Alan Grayson. This gentleman is known for his fantastic cowboy boots and exceptional taste in American flag ties, which he tells me he even got a brand new tie on Amazon just for this debate, and it doesn't disappoint. Beautiful American flag tie.
Boxers or briefs? Yeah.
Not asking.
All right, so let's get started. We did a coin flip right before the debate, and Congressman Grayson won, and he's elected to do his opening statement first. A minute for opening statements. Go ahead.
Thank you. My job as a member of Congress, and hopefully next year as a senator, is a very simple one. It's to make sure that every Floridian, every American can be all that he or she can be, unchained by poverty, by poor health, by a lack of education, or by discrimination. That's my job. Now, more and more what we find is that people are struggling in order to be able to accomplish that. That inequality is rising dramatically in America, that fewer and fewer people have a job, have a home, fewer and fewer people have a car, or any sort of savings for their retirement or either health coverage. That has to end. I want to see an America, I want to help make an America where everyone can see a doctor when he or she is sick and get the care that they need to stay healthy and alive. I want to see an America where compensation for work is actually a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. That means health coverage for you and your family. That means a much higher minimum wage. That means paid sick leave and paid vacations. But above all, I want to see a new deal for seniors. Seniors deserve a raise. It's been 40 years since there was any increase at all in Social Security benefits. I'm working hard right now in the House of Representatives to change that, to make sure that seniors get the raise that they deserve, that they were denied this year, and they get the raise they deserve in the future, as well as extending Medicare to cover your eyes, ears, and teeth. A lot of this may sound like common sense, but the political system is created to frustrate, to stop, to halt progress. And I have been named the most effective member of Congress because of all the good things I've gotten done for people time and time again. I want to do more of that in the Senate. Thank you.
All right, up next, Congressman Jolly.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the Open Debate Coalition. Thank you to each one of you who submitted questions. And thank you to my colleague Alan for agreeing to this format as well. I think this is a very good thing. I've been in Congress for only 2 years now, and I have made it a point every day to fight for the people of Florida, to put it all on the line every single day. For our veterans who faced a health care crisis, I introduced legislation to empower them to choose where they receive their health care. For our seniors, I've introduced legislation to create a new index for how you calculate cost of living adjustments that reflects the true costs to the elderly. For our young people, I've championed early childhood education, student nutrition, student readiness. For our homeowners and our businesses, I've championed flood insurance relief, flood insurance reform. And yes, where I believe the president has overstepped or is wrong in issues from foreign policy to economic security, I have challenged the president on behalf of the people of Florida. And at the end of the day, the most important reform we can make is to reform Congress, which is why many of you may have seen in the last 24 hours my fight to change Washington forever by enacting the STOP Act, to prohibit members of Congress from directly soliciting a contribution from you. Regardless of what your priority is, a balanced budget, border security, immigration reform, early childhood education. The reason the advances are not being made is because we have a Congress that's spending too much time asking you for money and not doing their job. It's why I've introduced the STOP Act, and I am going to fight every day to get it done, leave it all on the table.
All right, thank you. Now let's get started with our questions. As promised, the first one is from a young American. You're going to see that this is unlike a lot of the other debates. He asked it in New York. His name is Logan, and it got voted up almost to the very top. And so that's why we're presenting first. And it's on campaign finance reform. And remember, every single one of these questions is in the top 30 based on Florida votes, because this is obviously for the Florida Senate seat. So Logan, take it away.
Reform the campaign finance system. 90% of Americans believe that money needs to get out of politics. So how are you going to work with the president to create a viable campaign finance system that people can trust?
So Congressman Jolly, you brought this up. First question, so it goes to you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question from Logan. So one of the things we can do right now is get Congress back to work, get them off the phones, asking people for money. That's a congressional reform. Listen, I'm a Republican who can tell you there is too much money in politics. Let's talk about transparency. Let's talk about accountability. Let's make sure any political message, we know who it comes from. You know, we have to balance the constitutional privilege of any individual to participate in an election, how they choose, with reasonable regulations. Let's start by passing the STOP Act. Let's get members of Congress off the phone shaking down the American people for money. That's one way to do it. And then let's begin to address how do we get to a better campaign finance system than we have now. I was elected in, at the time, what was the most expensive congressional race in history. Almost $14 million in a little over 10 weeks in one county. Imagine what that $14 million could have done for the county of Pinellas County, Florida, instead of being spent on TV. We can do better. And I will work with Al, and I will work with any Republican or Democrat to try to get to a better place than where we are right now.
All right, we're going to do follow-ups after each person gets the chance to respond for a minute. So, Congressman Grayson.
We in this campaign are creating a new paradigm for campaign finance. It is a revolution. I am the only member of Congress out of 435 of us who financed most of his 2014 successful campaign with small donors. I'm the only member of Congress who did that in 2012 as well. Twice in a row, 1 out of 435. I'm the only member of Congress running for the Senate right now who has financed most of his campaign through small donors. The only one. We have had over 125,000 people come to the modestly named website senatorwithguts.com and make a contribution. This is the revolution. It's happening right in front of our eyes. There's two ways to raise money. You can go to the billionaires and the multinational corporations. You can go to the lobbyists and the PACs and the special interests, and you can beg them for cash in return for favors. We know what those favors are. They're bailouts, they're no-bid contracts, they're deregulation, as they call it, they're tax breaks. It's quid pro quo. Well, the people who've come to my website, senatorwithguts.com, all 125,000 of them, and contributed, they want nothing in return for their money except good government. And that's the way forward. That's how you do it. I was in the courtroom when the Citizens United decision was determined. I was the only public official in the courtroom other than Mitch McConnell, who was 2 seats to my left. You and I have discussed this on the air, Cenk. And I said at the time on MSNBC on Keith Olbermann's show that night, if we do nothing, you can kiss this country goodbye. I'm doing something.
All right. So first follow-up goes to Congressman Jelly. The STOP Act, from what I understand, involves representatives not calling the donors anymore.
That's right.
But does someone still call them? Does someone on your staff call them? And if so, do we still have the same private financing issue at hand? It's just that you're not making the calls?
So the issue, we all know about the amount of money in politics. This is about the amount of time it takes to raise the money. It doesn't apply to challengers. The STOP Act does not. It only applies to sitting members of the House and the Senate. And it says you are cheating the taxpayers if you spend 20 to 30 hours a week raising money instead of doing the job you ran to do. And hopefully this will give breathing room to my colleagues on the left and the right to fight for what they believe in. Get back to work. Get off the phone. It does leave in place the current campaign finance construct. Now, I'll tell you one of the reasons why. We can get the STOP Act done right now. We could get it done this year. Campaign finance, I'm afraid with all the complexities, is a multi-year effort to actually get it done. So I'm willing to work with anybody on campaign finance reform, but I don't want that to distract from something we can accomplish today, which is the STOP Act.
I want to show you guys a graph and then get your response real quick. This is something based on the Princeton and Northwestern study. For 2 decades they looked at it, even actually before Citizens United.
Hi, I'm Mark Ruffalo.
No, not yet, Mark. Hold.
You cannot stop the Hulk.
So what they found out, unfortunately, is that public policy is not at all related to public opinion. So that's the flat line. In an ideal democracy, you'd have a diagonal line, as you see there, that says if 100% of the American people wanted it, it'd have a 100% chance of success of getting passed. That would be a democracy. That's your diagonal line. Now, the flat line is what it is today for 90% of Americans. No effect on public policy at all. And then the yellow line is for the economic elite and special interests. They're much closer to the ideal. They have a democracy, but we don't. It's because they have the money. So Congressman Grayson, A, how do you solve this? And then specifically, Benny Baskin from Georgia asked, and it got voted up, are you in favor of a 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution to make sure you put an end to money in politics?
Look, we live in an oligarchy. That's a fact. Some people say it's an oligarchy, some people say it's a plutocracy. I'll let you decide which. But the fact is that if you're a member of Congress, on most committees, you'll have somebody who comes to your office with a bundle of checks before a vote from lobbyists who are voting in favor of that bill, lobbying in favor of that bill. You vote for the bill, and you get another bundle of checks afterward. It's that bad. And I'm not just talking about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 members of Congress. I'm talking about 434 of them. It's pervasive. That's how it's done. And frankly, nobody can even conceive of any other possibility until now. Now there is an alternative, and it's called power to the people. And the kind of constitutional amendment that you're talking about would be a great thing. But is it really necessary? What if every American woke up tomorrow and said, I'm going to choose the candidates. I'm not going to let the party bosses choose the candidates. I'm not going to let the lobbyists choose the candidates. I'm going to choose the candidates. I'm going to put my money where their mouth is. Well, it would be overwhelming. And in fact, it has been overwhelming. I raised more money in my 2012 campaign than any other member of Congress, and I did it mostly with small donors.
But if I could, would you be in favor of the amendment?
Yes.
Yes. Congressman Jolly, yes or no on that?
So it would depend on what's in it. I think, frankly, that's a 20-year effort that would take our eye off the ball. Let's fix what Alan just mentioned tomorrow by passing a law that says if you're a registered lobbyist who has declared you are lobbying the banking committee, then you can't contribute to anybody who sits on the banking committee. We could do that by an act of Congress today. We don't need a constitutional amendment to do that.
And a real quick follow-up, Congressman Grayson, would you support the STOP Act?
Yes, but I've done more than that. I introduced 8 bills, 4 of which I introduced just before the Citizens United decision because I could see something bad coming, and then 4 right afterward. We call it the Save Democracy Platform. We posted it at savedemocracy.net, got more than 100,000 co-sponsors, citizen co-sponsors for those bills, and 3 of them, 3 Grayson bills, were incorporated in the Disclose Act and actually passed the House. They were filibustered in the Senate, but they passed the House. So I'm already getting good things done in this regard, in addition to completely destroying and recreating the idea of how you finance a political campaign.
All right. So our next question comes from David in New York City, and it has been voted up thousands and thousands of times, nearly has 5,000 votes, so people really want to hear the answer to this question. And it follows along a very unique line for this 2016 cycle concerning the finance system. The question that David has is, what would you do to finally put an end to the too big to fail banking system?
Who's the question?
Congressman Jolly.
So I take a little different approach to this. Too big to fail can be solved by transparency, by capital requirements on the large banks, and by routine stress tests to make sure we don't have vulnerable big banks. But you know who has created too big to fail? It's President Barack Obama, because he has created a regulatory structure that has translated to too small to survive, too small to be competitive. Dodd-Frank, 12,000 pages of regulations, 400 new rules, has reduced access to community banks. We lose community banks at the rate of 1 per day. Risk-based lending for small businesses and communities all throughout Florida has evaporated because of the regulations on local community banks. The fiduciary rule, which is a new service or a new regulation to address financial advising, is actually going to reduce services to low-income investors, low-dollar investors, and new investors in communities throughout Florida. The over-regulation has so crushed the small and medium institutions that, yes, we are left with too big to fail.
Congressman?
Well, I must respectfully disagree with my esteemed colleague. I don't think Barack Obama was responsible for the economic crisis of 2008, and that economic crisis was a function of too big to fail. If not for the fact that we had a small number of huge institutions, it would have been no worse than a sniffle, and instead it was like a heart attack and almost killed America and almost killed the entire world economy. No, the answer has to be much more dramatic than that. If you, as an institution, if you're too big to fail, then you're too big to exist. You need to be broken up in the same way that a long time ago the trust busters broke up the steel mills, they broke up the telephone company, they broke up any kind of agglomeration of capital that was a threat to the rest of us. And that's the way it's got to be with the banks. Anything short of that is not sufficient. Right now, the big banks, because they are known not to be at risk to fail, end up borrowing much cheaper than the small banks do. Not because of regulation, but because essentially Uncle Sam will pick up the tab if they're ever in any risk. And that's something that's never going to change unless we break them up. If we take an institution with $1 trillion balance sheet and we make it into 5 institutions with $200 billion balance sheets, they will survive. I swear to you, nothing bad will happen to them. But what will happen to us is that we will no longer be at risk of an economy that could collapse any day because some wild-eyed trader, probably sniffing cocaine, ends up making a trade that could bring down an entire institution and maybe the world economy at the same time.
Is that based on Wolf of Wall Street? Is that because you saw Wolf of Wall Street and that seems
Look,
like a
let me tell you,
caricature?
there are 1 quadrillion outstanding shares of derivatives right now. 1 quadrillion. You know what that is? That's 1,000 trillion. That's how much is on these banks' balance sheets, implicitly or explicitly. $1 quadrillion. We produce in this country $16 trillion of goods and services every year. If somebody makes a mistake, that's 60 years worth of our production. That's 20 years worth of the whole world's production. We can't afford to be playing, oh, what would you call it? Russian roulette with our economy every single trading day.
So a follow-up to that, diving into the specifics, because it seems like both of you, if I'm hearing you correctly, are certainly against the proposition that something is too big to fail, and that is a net negative on the system. So how do you define that? Where do you draw the line when something needs to be trust busted, when something needs to be broken up? How big is too big? Congressman Jolly.
Well, and I would ask the question, how does government break up a financial institution arbitrarily? And what does that mean for the current customers? There are ways we can protect investors. So take variations of the Volcker rule that is currently in place to prohibit proprietary trading in certain products. If we exempt small institutions from some of the requirements, but perhaps we apply a variation of the Volcker rule to the large banks, we can protect the vulnerability of what we saw 10 years ago. But again, at the end of the day, if we insist, and we can do this through regulation, if we insist on sufficient capital requirements to back investments, we insist on transparency of the large banks, and then routine stress testing to ensure that those banks actually can meet their commitments. We can prevent things. Listen, with respect to Alan, why are community banks failing at a rate of 1 a day? Why are there less community-based lending services to communities throughout Florida? Why are there fewer services in investment advising from small firms throughout Florida in your community, the person, the man or woman you go to church with who has hung a shingle out and they've been your financial advisor for years, and you got a letter last week saying, sorry, because of the new fiduciary rule of this administration, I can no longer service your account. That's evaporating in our local communities, and it's only empowering too big to fail.
Well, again, I have to disagree. I mean, the reason why you have smaller institutions who are having trouble competing is simply because the bigger institutions have basically what amounts to a government guarantee. And their borrowing costs are therefore, and I mean therefore, for that very reason, much less than the borrowing costs of the smaller institutions. It's not an economy of scale. It's basically a forward bailout. And I want to point out that if we had done every single thing that Congressman Dolly just recommended in 2008 or before that, we still would have had a crash. The only way to avoid this happening, and it's going to happen sooner or later, it's just a question of when, it's going to happen unless we take control of the big banks, break them up, and make them safe for us.
But Congressman Jolly, just to follow up really quickly here, it sounded like all the prescriptions that you mentioned, the stress tests, et cetera, are what Dodd-Frank does. So are you happy with Dodd-Frank in that regard? And do you think it's sufficient to maintain these banks' order so that they won't cause the kind of collapse that Congressman Grayson's talking about?
Dodd-Frank went way too far with the amount of regulations and rules. 12,000 pages, 400 new rules. Even Alan joined with me and others on providing relief on auto loans. We've tried to do the same, some of us, on mortgage loans, on exempting or at least raising the asset level of small banks to have relief under Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank has hurt services to the people who need it the very most. And so what we see through stress testing is the vulnerability of a system that yes, we can precisely address. But again, it is this administration that has driven out the small lenders.
Okay, so from what I gather, you like some of Dodd-Frank and you want to do all the things that you described that Dodd-Frank does do, you just think it does a little too much. So you're for less regulation of the banks. Am I getting it wrong, or?
Less regulation than under Dodd-Frank? Absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right.
No question.
So you're for breaking them up and you're for less regulation.
But I would ask,
of the
how do you
banks.
break up? How does government inject itself into a private institution and break it up?
Well, how did we break up the telephone companies? That's within my reckoning, within my lifetime. I'm sure people remember there used to be just Ma Bell, and now there's dozens of different providers of telephone service, including, for goodness sake, your cable company. You can get telephone service from your internet company right now. I mean, it's not that difficult. We've done it over and over again, stretching all the way back to the Sherman Act in the 1890s. So I'm pretty sure if there's one thing the government has mastered, it's how to do this and how to do it right. It's not that complicated. We had a rule until recently that said that you had to separate investment banking from other banking. That rule is now out the window. All we have to do is restore that rule, and that's a big step toward eliminating the problem of too big to fail.
All right, as you guys can already tell, we're diving into the issues a little bit more in depth to make sure that you guys get the answers that you wanted. Let's move on to the next question now. Social Security. Gloria Hartness from Tampa, Florida asked this question, and it was number 3 nationally in the voting, number 1 in Florida in the voting. What will you do in your position to keep Social Security and Medicare strong? So let's start with Congressman Jolly.
Sure. So listen, I'm actually one of the Republicans who has regularly voted against the budget presented by my side of the aisle because I believe some of the changes it makes for people under 55 are too aggressive. Right? I'm 43 years old. I'm not too young for the government to honor the promise of Social Security and Medicare that's been made to me. The way I approach reforms is this. If you have been in the system for 40 quarters, that's how you vest for Social Security and Medicare, 40 quarters, I think we should treat that as though you're vested, and the rules that apply will apply. No changes. Let's recognize the out-year debt of that obligation because Congress has been so bad at the math over the past 30 years, it has created an out-year debt. Let's put it on the balance sheet and own it as debt. But if you are new to the workforce, you are still going to have the best Social Security and Medicare system in the world, but it might look different than what today's looks like. But if you are currently vested in Social Security or Medicare, let's secure that promise. It has been made. Let's honor it. No changes in benefits. But then recognize the out-year debt. You see, we have $19 trillion in debt if you don't count the out-year obligations. That number goes up threefold if you start to count the out-year obligations. Let's recognize that debt, be responsible about paying it down, and put it on the balance sheet.
Congressman Grayson, as you're answering the same question, especially if you could tell us the difference between your two positions, that would be helpful.
It's like the difference between night and day. What Congressman Jolly just described as a cut in benefits, albeit just for future beneficiaries and not the current beneficiaries. I am completely adamantly opposed to that. In fact, I wrote the No Cuts petition that 100 members of Congress and 3 million American citizens signed against any and every cut in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits. We haven't had a raise for seniors in 40 years. Seniors deserve a raise. We shouldn't be looking at how we should cut Social Security, cut Medicare, either for current beneficiaries or future beneficiaries. We should be looking about the fact that it's time for a raise. In those 40 years, we've had 3 generations of seniors pass through the system. And in those 40 years, the per capita income of the United States has increased by 97%, while during those 40 years, the purchasing power of Social Security benefits has decreased by 3%. That's why I have proposed the Seniors Deserve a Raise Act, which gives seniors a 2.9% increase they were cheated out of their cost of living adjustment this year. That's why I've proposed the Seniors Have Eyes, Ears, and Teeth Act, which extends Medicare to cover eyes, ears, and teeth and has 147 co-sponsors as we sit here today. And that's why I've introduced the Scrap the Cap Act, which the Social Security Administration has scored and says it would eliminate any problems with financing in Social Security from now until the end of time. These are the things that need to be done. We need to move forward, not backward. We don't need cuts. Cuts are hurting seniors who desperately need these benefits.
If I may.
Yeah, Congressman Jolly, address it whether it's really a night and day difference and whether you're willing to expand Social Security or not.
It is a night and day difference because you know the greatest cut of all would be the collapse of a Social Security system because there wasn't the leadership in Congress to recognize it is failing actuarially. And if we don't change the accounting, Social Security won't be there and Medicare won't be there. It is neglect by members of Congress who refuse to recognize that the greatest driver of our national debt is in programs that have been promised and have been earned. So just because Washington's bad at math doesn't mean we get to look the other way and seniors should pay the penalty. I applaud Alan for working on the CPI issue. I've introduced legislation myself as well that would adjust how cost of living increases are considered for seniors, to recognize that seniors have unique needs when it comes to health care and other issues where the costs are higher than others in the population. We can honor every promise that has been made to our seniors. Nobody is trying to cut it, but I promise you, if we fail to address the long-term impact of the obligations on Social Security and Medicare, the greatest cut of all will happen, and it will happen at the hands of, frankly, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who refuse to touch the issue.
So I've got to follow up there because in 2010, Social Security had a $2.8 trillion surplus. Right. And so are you concerned that that surplus is not enough, or are you saying Well, we already spent that surplus. That's why we're going to run out of money.
No, the timeline, we know that the benefits that will be due in the out years over the coming decades, there will be insufficient resources in the trust fund to pay for it. And so what I have said is, let's secure the benefits for everybody that's earned them. Let's say as a nation, we're going to honor those earned benefits, and we're going to put it on the balance sheet as an obligation of the nation. But the actuarial system of the current Social Security and Medicare systems will ensure failure by the time the youngest generations get there. That's where we need to look at appropriate reforms. I voted against my own party's budget because they want to make changes for anybody under the age of 55. I think that's too aggressive. Let's look at reforms, but do it over a longer cost curve that protects the financial planning of people who are in the middle of their careers.
May I respond to that?
Real quick, go ahead.
All right, listen, Social Security and Medicare, these are covenants between one generation and another. This is important to me. My master's thesis at Harvard was on gerontology and public policy. I started an organization called the Alliance for Aging Research. I was an officer of that organization for more than 20 years, the longest sustained effort of my entire life, longer than my political career by quite a large factor. And I will tell you that it galls me to hear this idea that we have to cheat seniors in order to make the budget out. That's just wrong to me. There's only one small change you have to make. You have to make sure that you treat every dollar like every other dollar, and then it's solvent forever. Let's talk about LeBron James. You know when he stops paying his Social Security taxes? He stops paying his Social Security taxes at the beginning of the second quarter of the first game of the season. Rest of the game pays nothing. Rest of the 81 games of the season pays nothing. The off season still pays nothing. That's ridiculous. If we simply made everybody pay the same percentage of their income, the system is solvent forever and ever and ever.
Now, are you saying that about LeBron James because he left the Heat? That seems very personal, Congressman. So, very important question. A very important question here for both of you. Do you like and have you ever watched The Avengers?
Yes, but it's not as good as DC Comics. I mean, I
We're
used
not
to
getting into
spend
that.
my Mondays and Thursdays running out of the school at 3 o'clock, going over to the candy store and buying the new issues of Batman, Superman, The Flash, Green Lantern. You can't match that with The Avengers, but I still love The Avengers.
Well, we have the first, I believe first ever perhaps, question for a U.S. senatorial debate by an Avenger. The Hulk is here with a very green question.
Hi, I'm Mark Ruffalo. Scientists say that a rapid transition to 100% clean, renewable wind, water, and solar power in Florida will create 140,000 jobs, eliminate 3,000 premature air pollution deaths, and over 50,000 illnesses in Florida per year, increase energy independence, reduce terrorism risk, and reduce both direct and social costs of energy. With that in mind, here's a question from Jen in Rhode Island that got thousands of votes.
Do you accept that climate change is the single greatest threat our world faces? And if yes, then will you support or put forth legislation that keeps more fossil fuels in the ground and greenhouse gases out of our atmosphere?
Congressman, climate change. Is it the biggest crisis that mankind faces right now?
Who would you like to start?
Let's start with you, Congressman Grayson.
The answer is yes. I can't think of anything else that could literally destroy the planet other than climate change. You know, we run the risk not just of higher ocean levels or more storms, we run the risk of a runaway greenhouse effect. No one really knows whether that would happen or not. No one knows when it would happen. So we're playing dice with planet Earth. That's very disturbing to me. You know, we have names for things like killing a person, killing a nation. We don't have even a name for what it would mean to kill a whole planet. And that shows you how serious this is. And I've worked very hard to try to avoid this. I'll give you some examples. For 2 years in a row, I passed extensions on conservation efforts in people's homes. This means reduced greenhouse gases. Each year, I've had the government hand out credits of $1.3 billion in a 20% tax credit. And I've done that for 2 years in a row. So a total of $2.6 billion Grayson green energy tax credits have been handed out to people all across the nation, including in Florida, and they've resulted in $13 billion of investment in clean energy. In addition to that, I passed an amendment a few months ago that helps to keep our rivers, our estuaries clean, with a 9% increase in funding for that. I've been there. I've been fighting this battle and making sure that my children and my grandchildren inherit a good green earth.
Congressman Jolly.
The challenges from climate change are real. But is climate change the greatest threat to our nation, as Alan just said? No. The greatest threat to our nation are agents of terror like the guy we saw in San Bernardino who killed 14 people in the name of jihad. The greatest threat we face as a nation is a nuclear-armed Iran who has said they wish to destroy the United States. The greatest threat we face as a nation are people who wish to destroy us tomorrow. That's the threat we have to address right now. That's the immediate address. When the President of the United States stood before a State of the Union address and said the greatest threat we face is climate change, he's wrong. The greatest threat we face are people who want to destroy the United States of America tomorrow. And that's what we need to address. Now let's get to the science. What do we do about climate change? Because let's have a contest of ideas over solutions. What we need to do is continue to invest in tax incentives for clean energy, for renewables, for fuels, for wind, for solar, you name it. Let's continue to advance research in these areas, which we've done in Congress. Continue to add more money to a program that invests in research in these areas. But what will not work is policies of this president, like the Clean Power Plan, that risk putting 300 people in Putnam County out of business and increasing utility costs for 1.6 million people across the state. What won't work is the President's Waters of the United States regulation that's going to cost Pinellas County, just one county, between $400 million and $2.5 billion. It will cost them $31 million to fix a single ditch. What won't work is a blended fuel standard that industry can't meet and the President has to continue to delay it. A renewable fuel standard that continues to increase cost to industry. The largest beer distributor in the state of Florida, Great Bay, just went to an all-solar roof. And you know why they did it? Because the return on investment is finally in a 5-year window and it makes economic sense. And so they're able to grow their business, grow employment, grow jobs, while still contributing to a cleaner environment. That's the transition we need. 10 years ago, if there was a regulation that said, Great Bay, you have to go to an all-solar roof, they probably would have had to lay off their workforce because the cost was out of reach. We can do this. We can solve climate challenges through incentives and research, not through mandates that can't be met.
I think as Americans, we're all certainly for cheaper beer. However, while I agree with that entirely, I myself am not a climate scientist. I'm a journalist. And a very reputable journalistic magazine, National Geographic, has a graph, a chart. I think we can put it over here on the screen. This is what they have published as a future outline of the state of Florida in year 2100. Year 2100, sorry. This is if the water line of the ocean rises by 5 feet. This is what is projected. My question to both of you is that a realistic view of what could potentially happen to the state that you want to be one of the 2 senators for?
So I'm not one in my party that's going to argue with the science. I'd rather argue about where the solutions are because I think the president's wrong. You know, one of the ways we need to address that, and the mayor of Miami Beach, a Democrat from Miami Beach, is doing it today, is what are our municipal governments doing to underground utilities, to raise elevation of roads, to eventually protect life, safety, and property. There are a lot of things that need to be done to deal with what the scientists are saying is coming. I'm happy to have that debate over where the solutions are. I'll accept the science. Let Alan and I have a debate over the solutions because very respectfully, and I know this, we have very different disagreement on the solutions.
Well, I want to point out, and this is completely fortuitous, that the map that you just showed is something that was at my website when I declared for Congress in 2006. I wanted people to see what this glorious state would look like once the ice caps melt and once the sea level rises and once Miami is under 50 feet of water. You're going to have a lot of trouble putting it up on stilts if you're talking about 50 feet of water. The only good part of that is that Rush Limbaugh's house is right on the coast, so his house goes first. But leaving that aside, it's all tragedy, and it's avoidable tragedy. And you know what? In the last 8 years, the president has been pretty much the only person who's actually done anything about it. The president's Clean Power Plan, which is now attempting to be tied up in the courts by the other side, The President's Clean Power Plan actually is a means to cut our carbon emissions, our carbon pollution, substantially. And with regard to the auto emissions, who was it who actually increased the corporate average fuel economy standards in this country? It wasn't the House of Representatives, it wasn't the Senate, it wasn't the Republicans or even the Democrats, it was the President of the United States. And now with the President's Paris Climate Agreement, which I support, and I've told the President I support it, I think we actually see a way forward. Look, I voted in favor of the so-called cap and trade bill in my first term. I was punished for it. The arch opponents of the cap and trade bill, the Koch brothers, then spent $4 million to defeat me the following year. I could live with that. I think the planet's a lot more important than that.
Okay, now if we can start to keep the answers a little bit shorter on both sides, that'd be great. I do want to go to a video here on this same topic because it was voted #1 nationally and #3 in Florida. It's from Edward in Miami, Florida. So let's go to that.
How will you work to make renewable energy more affordable in Florida? We receive incredibly high levels of sunlight that could support a great solar power project not just for us, but potentially neighboring counties and states. Our coastal tidal power could also be harnessed.
Tax incentives that continue to create an industry that employs more people in the state of Florida and gives greater energy options to people throughout the state that is cleaner, renewable, and cheaper. We do that through tax incentives. We can also continue to invest federal dollars in research, which we should. The Clean Power Plan that Al and I have been talking about was stayed by the Supreme Court because of its irreparable financial harm to states. Okay, this has been stayed by a court because the president has imposed irreparable harm on states. My point is simple. Let's reach consensus on this. Let's solve this as a country and get out of this mandate world that's destroying communities.
Congressman Grayson.
Well, I mean, look, unfortunately in public life there are people who are anti-pollution and people who are pro-pollution. That's just a fact. Now, I'm suggesting to you that the reason why we have the policies that we have today is because in the same way that Wall Street determines our economic policies, in the same way that the military-industrial complex determines our foreign policy, it's a fact that big oil determines our energy policy, and that has to change. It must change. What are we doing about it? What have I done about it? I've passed more amendments than any other member of Congress in the past 3 years. There are 26 Grayson bills that are now the law of the land, passed by the House, passed by the Senate, signed into law by the President, more than any other member of Congress. 4 of those were what I discussed earlier. The fact that we have $2.6 billion in energy credits for conservation in people's homes to make homes green. That wouldn't have existed if these bills had lapsed and if the Grayson bills had not been passed. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I've done. People can count on me. Now, I think we have to take it a step further. Right now here in Florida, it's technically illegal for you to put solar panels on your roof and sell that electricity to the electricity company. It's illegal. It's a law that goes back more than 50 years. Nobody has any idea why it's there. We have to eliminate that law, not just here in Florida, but throughout the country.
Okay, next question is from someone who's live in the studio, Anne-Marie De La Guardia from Deltona, Florida. Go ahead.
Politicians all over the country are getting between a woman and her doctor and taking away her constitutional right to choose. How will you protect a woman's right to choose?
Who would you like to go first?
Congressman John.
Sure. I appreciate that question. I believe life begins at conception, and that life deserves to be protected. And so for me, it's about creating a culture that values life, from the unborn to the child facing significant economic or hunger issues to the elderly person who perhaps is a shut-in. I understand it's a very personal issue. It's a very human issue. I will tell you, even the Supreme Court, in its landmark case 40 years ago, recognized the viability of the unborn as a test when they put certain restrictions on it. So for me, I believe life begins at conception. For others, it might be later. But I will tell you the Supreme Court and Congress eventually possibly will have to deal with the fact that 40 years after the viability standard was created, viability's changed as a result of medical science.
I believe, quite simply, that the most important right you have as a human being is the right to control your own body. And that includes terminating pregnancy if that's what you so desire. I don't think that there should be any shame in that. I think there should, if anything, be a shame in the concept that you force a woman to have a child that that woman does not want to have. To me, that itself is criminal. And therefore, among other things, I've adamantly opposed every effort by this Congress to try to restrict a woman's right to choose. I've proudly opened a Planned Parenthood clinic in my district and faced down protesters so that I could dedicate that clinic. And I have, with some degree of pride, actually attended Planned Parenthood fundraisers and contributed to them. I think that it's very important that women be treated with the same rights as men. And believe me, if men could have abortions, you could probably get them out of slot machines.
All right, now Anne Marie was the person who had asked that question that got voted up. She was in here in person. Next we have Maria Padilla, who's the founder of OrlandoLatino.com, who's going to ask a question on behalf of one of the people who got voted up.
Good evening, Congressman. I have a question from Samantha Morin from Pembroke, Massachusetts. And she says, Planned Parenthood is under fire for doctored videos that prove no crime or wrongdoing. Do you support defending or defunding Planned Parenthood?
Defending. There's a short answer for you.
Bingo. Okay, Congressman Jelly.
I'd say two things, and I'll keep it brief. When the videos came out, they were shocking. My side of the aisle quickly rushed to author a piece of legislation to defund Planned Parenthood, but in the process would have reduced medical care to individuals throughout the country in underserved communities. It's actually the jolly language. I introduced a bill that said we are going to disqualify Planned Parenthood as a vendor, but we are going to continue to fund women's health care services at the top level funding that it has been at. The other thing I will tell you is when my side of the aisle asked for an investigation of Planned Parenthood, I actually voted no. I was the only Republican to vote no. Should the issue be looked at? Yes, but there were already 3 committees looking at the issue. We didn't need a 4th. We're either going to be the party of less government or we're not. And so I did vote no against the Planned Parenthood investigation.
So Congressman Jelly, I'm a little confused by your position on that because you voted no in that case, but we've had 12 investigations at the state level. They've all said that the video was doctored and there was nothing illegal whatsoever. But yet you voted to defund Planned Parenthood. So if we know that there's nothing wrong with the video, why vote that way?
So I voted against the investigation because I think that investigation has already run its course. And frankly, I don't think my party should spend 3 months during the summer in a run-up to election revisiting this issue. We can continue to assess whether or not there was a violation. That can be done without a special congressional committee. What my legislation would have done is, pending the investigation, disqualify Planned Parenthood as a vendor, but continue to provide the maximum level of resources for other providers of those same services.
But why defund Planned Parenthood if it turns out all the investigations
Did you see
proved
the
they
video?
didn't do anything wrong?
Did you see the video?
Yeah, I
That's
saw
why.
it.
That's why.
But 12 investigators saw it and said that it was doctored, and so that's why I'm asking. But so you don't agree with those investigations?
Don't agree with which investigations?
That there was nothing wrong that Planned Parenthood had done. They had not sold any body parts.
I don't know the outcome of 12 different investigations. My point is it could have been settled with a single investigation, which is why I voted against the special committee.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Ben.
And I think it's fair to say that Americans, by the millions, found the practice of selling baby parts quite horrific.
Right.
Well, let me address that, okay? Let me
You're
address
stoking
that.
them now.
Let's jump. Let's jump. Tweet at me afterwards.
Okay. Let me just give me a minute here, okay?
Sure.
That's what Jewish people like me refer to as a blood libel. That's a lie that's just so utterly horrific that it takes away people's rational judgment, and all it can do is stir up hatred and demonize people. And respectfully, that's what you just did. That is not the appropriate way to discuss what Planned Parenthood is doing. It's simply inciting people to hatred. And God bless him, Barack Obama, whatever you may say about him, he never indulges in that, nor do I. Let's try to respect each other and not say someone's selling baby parts or the Mexicans are all rapists or any other lie like that that is meant to make people hate other people.
Congressman, respectfully, I was merely the proposition of the video and what they were based upon. That was the context. And that is not something that I am making a ruling on, as did or did not happen. I am merely saying the context of those videos caused outrage because that was how they were sold.
And it would be a violation to create a revenue line for the organization based on transacting in fetal parts. That was the point of the initial investigation.
And I do not claim to be an expert in these videos and do not claim to be an expert in these investigations that Cenk is discussing.
Yeah, let me just end on this note, just for the record, so everybody at home knows. Some of the 12 investigations at the state levels, a lot of them were conducted by Republicans, and one in Harris County, Texas, did indict 2 people, but not the people at Planned Parenthood, but the ones who made the videos. So that is the only indictments that have ever come out of that, just so we're clear. So there was no, according to those 12 states, no selling of body parts whatsoever, and the only people ever indicted were the people who made the videos. And the Harris County, Texas, by the way, investigation led also by Republicans. Okay, now let's move forward to the next question.
So the next question comes from James in Arkansas. This question is asked concerning a very hot topic right now, the Supreme Court. Do you believe that President Obama's Supreme Court pick should have a hearing before the president leaves office?
Who would you like to answer that first?
Congressman Grayson.
The answer is yes. There is a House resolution to that effect. I'm co-sponsoring the House resolution. It's a sad situation that we're in. You know, under the original Constitution, African Americans were considered to be 3/5 of a human being. We've moved beyond that point. Now our first African American president gets only 7/8 of a term. He should be able to appoint people to the Supreme Court and any other position as part of his prerogatives as the President of the United States until his very last day in office.
Congressman Jolly.
The President has the Article 2 authority to appoint. The Senate has the Article 1 authority to accept or reject it. I end up in the same place as Leader McConnell on this, but I get there a very different way. I think the United States Senate should have a hearing and even consider a vote. And understand this, rejecting the nominee because he is wrong on the Second Amendment and he is wrong on labor unions is not obstructionism. That's actually the proper exercise of the Senate's Article 1 authority. If they bring it up for a vote, vote him down. Ask the President to nominate a second person, one that could actually meet approval of Republicans in the United States Senate, because what the President has to accept is Republicans currently control the United States Senate, and they have the constitutional prerogative to vote the nominee up or down. I do think he should have a hearing, and I would like to see a vote because I think he would be voted down.
As a senator, if you were serving in this position currently, as a senator for the state of Florida, would you meet with Merrick Garland?
Sure, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so let me follow up then with Congressman Grayson. Merrick Garland has voted in favor of Citizens United. Now, his advocates would say he had no choice. He was following Supreme Court precedent, but he did further Citizens United. He also voted against habeas corpus rights. So on those issues, not very progressive. Would you, if a Democrat won the election, would you ask President, and you won your seat, would you ask President Obama to end his nomination and let the next Democratic president pick a different Supreme Court nominee?
In the unfortunate event that Garland's nomination is still pending, the answer is yes. But I want to point out that I think it's fundamentally unfair to Garland and to every other nominee to say, in most cases, where were you on this issue, where were you on this issue, where were you on this other issue, as long as they're following precedent. And you yourself pointed out that once the Supreme Court decided Citizens United, that awful day when I was in the courtroom, Mitch McConnell 2 seats to my left, that was the law of the land until they decide otherwise. I'm very pleased that 4 members of the current Supreme Court have already said they will overturn Citizens United with a 5th vote. I will ask the President to actually make a recess appointment to make that happen. The President decided not to. He went through the normal nomination process without a recess appointment. I want to see those bad laws, those bad precedents changed as quickly as possible. But you can't curse the man for simply following precedent. That seems unfair to him and unfair to the system of justice.
All right, let's move on to the next question, and that's about minimum wage. It comes from Dolores Paduano from Kissimmee, Florida. Is that right, Congressman?
Kissimmee.
Kissimmee, see? All
Kissimmee.
right, they're from Florida. Okay, now it is about the minimum wage. As I said, are you for, and this is the question, are you for a minimum wage increase on the federal level? If so, would you bring it up to the poverty level of $15 per hour? If so, would you bring it up? Oh, that is the same question. Okay, if instead you believe it should be incremental, how long until you would make it $15 an hour? Congressman Jolly, let's start with you.
Sure. Look, I'm for getting people off of minimum wage. And the state of Florida already has an $8.05 minimum wage that is higher than the federal level. It is indexed annually, and I would be willing to have that consideration as to whether or not we index a minimum wage at the federal level to allow for stability of financial planning by employers. Here's the important thing. If you went to the 1010 level of a few years back, the CBO, a nonpartisan congressional budget office, says we would have 500,000 fewer jobs. If you went to Hillary Clinton's proposal of 12, you would have 3.8 million fewer jobs. And if you went to Bernie Sanders' proposal, you would have over 6 million fewer jobs. So how do we actually get people off of minimum wage and in a growing economy? We do that through more conservative proposals. So I would consider an index at the federal level, but an arbitrary lift that would kill jobs for the bottom 4% of the workforce, right? It would be felt by the people who actually need the jobs most. I was a small business owner. I went through 8 months one time where I didn't pay myself because I wanted to keep my employees employed. If the government had told me arbitrarily, you have to raise your employee salaries by 30%, I already wasn't paying myself. My only option would have been to lay people off and to unemploy people in the name of a minimum wage hike.
Congressman Grayson.
Well, first, let me point out a few facts. There are parts of the country that have higher minimum wages than the federal minimum wage. Those areas of the country generally have lower unemployment rather than the higher unemployment that Congressman Jolly is describing.
And they are in metro areas where the economy can support it.
Well, I mean, we live in a metro area, both of us, where the economy can support it.
Explain to the person in Iowa why $15 is a wage that employers should have to be able to sustain.
Well, let me just continue here. Let me tell you why. If you calculate it out, you'll see that living on the minimum wage right now means trying to survive on $1,400 a month. Excuse me, but nobody can survive on $1,400 a month. I went through what's called the minimum wage challenge. Tried to do it for a few days. I ended up dropping it because I had to take my son to the dentist, and so much for the minimum wage challenge. It's impossible when you have any kind of health bill, any kind of car repair bill, anything that might conceivably throw you off the track of eating nothing but ramen noodles every day for the rest of your life. Look, you know, this is America. In Australia, they have a $16 an hour minimum wage, in Australia. And they've had a booming economy for years. And their unemployment has been less than ours for most of the past 10 years that they've had that minimum wage. If they can do it, then we can do it. And the same thing is true across the board. In Germany, by law, every worker gets 4 weeks plus of paid vacation. You haven't seen the German economy collapse because of that. There's only 3 countries in the entire world where there's no paid vacation by law. We happen to be one of them. The other 2 are in Africa. You know, we are treating our workers like dirt. Out of the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the entire country, Orlando is dead last in wages. In the same way that seniors deserve a raise, workers deserve a raise. And we need to be able to properly compensate those people who are doing the work that makes everything possible. Couldn't be in the studio today, couldn't be standing behind this lectern unless somebody made this studio, made this lectern, and they deserve more than $1,400 a month.
One last follow-up for Congressman Jolly. Is there a number that we can go back to the person who asked this question and say, okay, here's the minimum wage you think is ideal that you'd like to get to?
You know, just like on climate change, the statement that there's very few scientists in Congress, there's very few economists as well. So why do lawmakers arbitrarily choose a number, right? Why was it 12-12 4 years ago, or 10-10, or it's 15? That's why I say let's index it. Let's get the brightest minds in the world, in the room, figure out what that number should be, index it, and get the politicians out of this. It works in states across the country, including Florida, that have a higher minimum wage, and it's indexed so employers can plan for the increased wages of the next year.
Here's a funny thing. I actually was an economist for 4 years, and as far as I know, the only one in the House of Representatives. And that's why I can go through the economic data and tell you that the arguments against the minimum wage are false. They're misleading. They don't get to the real fact of the matter. The fact is that if you gave people a $15 minimum wage, there'd be more customers. That's what businesses really want. They don't want to chintz their employees. They don't want to force their employees to rely upon food stamps or Medicare. What they really want more than anything else is customers. And you put $15 an hour into people's hands, they'll spend it. The whole economy gets elevated.
So how does somebody in my situation call an employee in and say, I'm sorry, I have to let you go, because the government has just said I have to give you a 30% raise, and I'm already not paying myself, and there aren't funds to keep you employed? You can study the economics all you want, but the impact on job losses is real, and it hits the small businesses the hardest.
Before I took up the cause of the $15 minimum wage, I met with people in Tampa who were making the minimum wage for Florida, about 2 dozen of them. I asked every one of them, the question that Congressman Jolly just asked. Are you willing to run the risk that you might lose your job so that people could have a $15 minimum wage? Every single one answered yes, even though they knew they might be the one. And frankly, with a properly managed economy like Germany has, you would never have to worry about that. There'd always be full employment.
What's keeping you from raising it to $87 an hour?
Well, it has to have some correspondence to the value of people's labor, but the fact is that there is a value to people's labor, and it's $15 an hour or more. You know, we artificially subsidize it to make it seem less than that. The only way that people survive when they're making $8 or $9 or $10 an hour is because the government subsidizes it. Well, Walmart is the largest welfare recipient in this entire country. You look at the amount of money they get for their employees' benefit, for their earned income tax credit, their Medicaid coverage, and the food stamps, every other form of benefits that they get, this is subsidizing that pay. If they were making $15 an hour, the taxpayers would be better off.
Eddie from California has a question that was voted on very enthusiastically, and it seems a lot of people are very interested. It's not a video question. He asks, what are your plans to deal with out-of-control college tuition and student debt? And just a few numbers here, gentlemen, especially because we're right here in Florida and you're running for the Senate seat in Florida. Over half of Floridian students carry student debt when they graduate. The total amount of student debt in Florida exceeds $1 billion. Florida has double the national average of student debt loans in default. And the average Floridian owes north of $26,000 in student debt, which ranks the 5th highest in the country. How do you combat this problem?
Who would you like to go first?
Congressman Jolly.
So 41 million Americans have student loan debt. Next to mortgages, it's the greatest debt burden on individuals and families. There are some simple things we can do right now by allowing student loans to be refinanced, by making them eligible for reorganization and bankruptcy cases. Those are 2 initiatives I've supported. Creating additional flexibility for accelerating Pell Grant, need-based aid, considering if we can find a way to pay for it, expanding Pell Grant. But you want to know the real way to do this? Let's tie the performance of long-term student loans to what the universities receive. Because understand, you can rack up $100,000 in debt, and the day of your graduation, the university's been paid. But you might struggle with that debt for decades. Right now, the only trigger on a university that invokes any type of penalty is if a default rate of their graduated students reaches about 18%. I think we should go back to the system where the university is remunerated based on the performance of the long-term loan.
Congressman Grayson.
Well, I have introduced the Sanders College for All Act. That includes everything that Congressman Jolly just described. It also, beyond that, makes public college free. There are 7 other countries around the world where public college is A, free, and B, taught in English. So you ask yourself, how can Slovenia afford to provide public college in English, where Florida and California and New York and Iowa and New Hampshire somehow can't? If you look at what is actually being spent in the system, it's a drop in the bucket. The entire college system for the state of Florida is a tiny fraction of the state's overall budget. We already have the federal government providing a very substantial part of the K through 12 cost of education. Why do we stop there? You know, it's not a new idea. Free public college dates back in the United States to the 1840s. My father went to the City College of New York, a free college. And there's no reason why we can't make that same promise to everyone else. As I indicated before, we want people to reach their potential in life. Every single one of us is a unique bundle of talents, skills, interests, limitations, and I want to see the truck drivers who are willing and able to become doctors. I want to make sure that everybody reaches their full potential. And in our 21st century economy, that often requires a college education. So I say, let's open up the public colleges to everyone.
Congressman Jolly, do you support debt-free college?
So that's a state decision. If a state and their taxpayers decide to provide that for students, then that's left to the states to decide. I don't think the federal government should be telling the state of Florida that you have to give free college. If the voters in Florida want it, then the administrators of the state university system can decide how to pay for it, and the taxpayers would have to accept that. I don't think there's a role for the United States Congress in that. I disagree with Alan. I disagree with Bernie Sanders on this.
All right, let's move on to the next question. It's about for-profit prisons. Talik Taylor from Chicago asked the question, and then, as usual, Floridians voted it up. Black Americans are being persecuted and viciously mistreated in our prison system. Private prisons are at the root, she says. If elected, will either of you support abolishing private prisons? Let's start with Congressman Grayson.
The answer is yes. What is government? One way to look at what government is the government holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Whether we're talking about killing foreign soldiers, or we're talking about the police arresting anyone, or we're talking about a judgment in court, a money judgment being enforced by a garnishment, or for that matter, we're talking about imprisoning somebody. The core function of government is that. So it makes no sense whatsoever to contract it out. It's fundamentally irresponsible to say to someone, we'll let you make a buck off incarcerating somebody else. And it delegitimizes the entire system. The reason why prison guards do what they do, and it's a very difficult, dirty job, it's a horrible job to have. The reason why they can do what they do is because they stand there in the place of you and me. They stand there in the place of the entire U.S., all citizens all together having making these decisions through the justice system collectively. Once you start to say to people, we'll give you an extra $1 if you cut back on the rations, or you put 3 or 4 prisoners in a cell instead of only 2, you've corrupted the system in a fundamental way. We cannot allow that.
Congressman Jolly.
So listen, I think privatization is an issue for elected leadership to decide if that's the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars. The question is the administration of prisons. Regardless if it's public or it's private, is it being done responsibly? And if somebody's violating the law in the way they're administering a prison, then they should be held responsible for that. You know, I had a very dear friend who made mistakes, and he actually ended up spending time in a state prison here in Florida. He faced significant health care challenges that I don't believe were being responded to adequately. I don't know if it was a private or a public prison. To me, it didn't matter. The issue was that the administration was failing. And so, should we wholesale prohibit privatization? I don't know. Perhaps there are areas where that is actually working for taxpayers. But the bottom line is if somebody's violating the law and the way they administer a prison, they should be held accountable for it.
Cenk, you mentioned the disproportionate effect on African Americans in your question, and I think that's exactly right, but it doesn't stop there. 23% of the African American adults in this state of Florida can't vote because their rights have not been restored. It's the highest proportion in the entire country. We have to not only treat prisoners as if they are human beings and not profit centers with a profit motive, but we also have to understand that when they've served their time, it's time to let it go and have them rejoin the family of American citizens with full rights.
So, Congressman Jolly, there's been some studies out showing that private prisons are not really cost savers. In Arizona, for example, they actually cost $1,600 more per inmate per year. But to me, the larger question, and I think what Talik was trying to get at, is not just the effects that it has and the cost that it has, but the fact that we incentivize some companies to take away the freedoms of some Americans. Isn't there something inherently problematic with that?
So that's wrong, and legislators should be held accountable for that. But there may be a model of privatization that saves taxpayers' dollars and does actually appropriately administer a prison system. And if there's one that works, then we shouldn't preclude it.
All right, we're going to voting rights next. So it's from Joel Stivens in Hialeah, Florida. And it goes like this. What will you do to improve voting, not just in Florida, but nationwide? We continue to see the effects of voter suppression wreak havoc in this country. What will you do to improve voting? There it is again, another repeat. Okay, I personally would like to see open primaries everywhere, a federal voting holiday, and an auto voter registration at 18 years of age. We had the video on that.
Joel is here to join us.
Oh, well, then you'll hear it again.
Voting, not just in Florida, but nationwide. We continue to see the effects of voter suppression wreak havoc in this country. I personally would like to see open primaries in all 50 states, a national federal voting holiday, and automatic voter registration at 18 years of age.
So let's start with Congressman Jolly on this one. And if you can be specific on his ideas, open primaries, federal voting, voter registration.
I think it's a great solution, open primaries. We should have them right here in the state of Florida. You've got a third of the electorate who is essentially disenfranchised from voting in primaries. And frankly, I think Republicans should embrace this because we can grow the party. by embracing conservative solutions that appeal to independents and those who are no party affiliations. So I would say yes to open primaries, and on the other issues, I would say whatever makes voting more accessible, most accessible, so that we have greater participation, I'd be willing to consider that.
Congressman Grayson.
Well, first, I have introduced legislation for this purpose. As I indicated before, I've introduced more bills than any other member, and I introduced a bill, among others, for Democracy Day. That makes our federal elections a federal holiday and gives people an opportunity to vote. We have a lot of people in my district who work 1 job, maybe 2 jobs, sometimes even 3 jobs, and they work on Tuesdays. So it makes it very hard for them to vote. Another thing that I'm in favor of, and I've come out in favor of, is the same system they have now in Colorado, where they mail every single voter a ballot. You can either use it, or you can go and vote on Election Day. Obviously, you can't do both, but I think that that has elevated turnout enormously, just as it has in Oregon, which is mail ballot only. Beyond that, I think we have to accept the fundamental idea that it is fundamentally wrong for the government to do anything to frustrate the right to vote. So I favor a constitutional amendment that declares the right to vote. I also have introduced legislation that would ensure that when you've served your time, apart from cases of murder or manslaughter or sex crimes, when you've served your time, you get back your rights. In Florida, we have first-class citizens and second-class citizens, and that's just wrong. You know, when you've served your time and you've paid your debt to society, you should be able to vote and protect yourself through the political system and have the same rights as everybody else.
Congressman Jolly, do you find any problems with the voter ID laws if they disenfranchise a significant percentage of some folks in the country? For example, 25% of African Americans don't have voter IDs.
Then let's do better, and let's make voting as easy and accessible for anybody who legally and responsibly wants to do so.
Okay. So I think that we don't have time for another question, so we're going to go to closing statements. Congressman Grayson is going to go first.
Thank you. I am delighted to have had this opportunity to address the issues of the day. You'll notice that the choice of paper versus plastic never came up. The choice of Diet Coke versus Coke Zero never came up. I know it's a big debate in my household. And I'm just really happy that finally the American people get to see what it's like to have 2 serious members of Congress, my friend.
Thank you, Alan.
Struggling with the great issues of the day. This is what it's all about. This is the way politics ought to be. We shouldn't be talking about how much we're sweating or how big our fingers may be. That's not what this is all about.
Although on that issue, we have not done you justice in this set. It is awfully hot in here. It is Florida. It is Florida.
Also an antiperspirant commercial.
But look, it comes back to what I said earlier. We're both struggling with this issue. The issue is rising inequality in the country, all right? We want people to be able to be all they can be, as I said at the beginning, but we have economic inequality, we have social inequality. People are struggling to remain in the middle class. They're falling out of the middle class. So the question is, whether you're talking about student loans or Social Security or whatever it may be, what are you going to do about it? What are you actually going to do to fix it? What have you done to fix it? You know, my organization I mentioned before, the Alliance for Aging Research, they have an award that they give out every year. They give it to the person who's done the most for seniors, and that's called the Claude Pepper Award. I helped to name that award. I want to win that award one day. I want to be the same champion for as Claude Pepper was for the state of Florida for an entire generation or more. That's what Florida needs today. A champion for seniors, a champion for workers, a champion for you.
Congressman Jolly.
Thank you, and thank you to the Open Debate Coalition. It is warm in here, not because of the contest of ideas, but I think because of the lights. And yeah, some of us are sweating, but I'll tell you what. Every single day I try to lay it on the line. I leave it all on the field. When I opened up this debate tonight, I said I've been fighting for Florida for 2 years. I'm asking for the opportunity to continue to do it again. When our veterans need better health care, let's give them the choice of where they receive it. When our seniors don't have a COLA, don't have an increase, let's fight to get it. When we have children who aren't ready for school, let's invest in student readiness, student nutrition, dropout prevention and reintegration programs, making GEDs more affordable, more accessible for people who want it. And yes, when the president is wrong on issues of national security and on overregulation that is reducing services and is crippling an economy in parts of Florida that need it the most, let's stand up and say there's a better way to do it. You know, I started by talking about the STOP Act. There's probably no better reform than we can do right now. Get Congress back to work. This contest of ideas Alan and I have had tonight is what we should be doing as candidates and members of Congress. It's why I introduced the STOP Act. It's why we have the StopAct.com, to ask people to join us in a movement, more than a campaign. I thank you for tuning in. I thank the Open Debate Coalition, and I thank each one of you for participating tonight. This has been a great night. Alan, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey, thank you guys. Thank you, gentlemen, Congressman, so very much. We had so much we didn't get a chance to get to, but that just proves the strength of the debate and the strength of these questions. I wanted to thank both congressmen for being here, the Open Debate Coalition, our partners, Americans for Tax Reform and Progressive Change Institute, and for everybody who submitted questions, and for the nearly 500,000 votes we got to decide which questions were answered. So thank you so much, and for the public who followed along.
And if you like the style of debate and you'd like to ask the questions going forward, well, we could do this at the presidential level and congressional levels all throughout the country. But in order to do that, you've got to impress the representatives that this is the right way to do that. You do that by watching this, getting your family and your friends to watch it. So if you're on Facebook right now and you watch it, share it, like it, and otherwise go to FloridaOpenDebate.com, FloridaOpenDebate.com, and make sure everybody gets the word on this. So, Congressman, thank you so much. And for all of you at home watching, thank you as well.